So here's what Bojack Horseman has to say about capitalism and the state of America today.
White whale's not evil, they're just capitalists.
What's the difference?
It's no secret that Bojack is an incredibly political show and doesn't shy away from addressing controversial social issues that many would rather avoid. In fact, a lot of people criticize this show for being too political and being part of the liberal Hollywood elite that seeks to promote woke values. When really, this show is extremely critical of Hollywood itself and details how capitalism and greed have wormed its way into this industry that still purports itself as being ahead of the curve or socially conscious on the surface, while still holding up these toxic cycles in the background. And not only Hollywood, but this show goes so far to expose the hypocrisy in our own system and to show the alarming direction America could be heading in real life, even if this cartoon is ridiculous at times. Hey, sometimes our world gets so weird, even outrageous satire seems possible. I wouldn't put it past us. One way the show depicts this is the commercialization of identity and art. Hollywood and the American film industry is one of the greatest examples of capitalist control over social messaging, and how industries can exploit artists and their intended messages for the sake of monetary value, at the expense of promoting true, socially important art and original ideas. Hollywood is a low-risk industry, and the reason that we see so many sequels, superhero movies, and general crap hitting the box office is because they're non-offensive. To make the most money, you have to appeal to the most amount of people, and that means not taking any risks whatsoever. Also, mass production is the name of the game. Another reason why these huge company movies are making such shitty, obvious cash grab films like Red One with huge, easily marketable stars is because they're trying to crank out as many as they can per year. It's not about the quality, even with the special effects now, it's about getting as much content out there as humanly possible. Overworking animators and special effects artists, reusing the same 5 boring-ass actors for everything, and some of them can't even act.
Hello, no!
Or, in The Rock and Kevin Hart's case, play the same character in every movie. Rebooting tired concepts instead of coming up with new ideas, it all helps them create hundreds of films and television shows per year, even if the quality of those pieces of media suffers as a result. Hell, think about Netflix's awful-ass strategy, you know, the service that this show even started on. It's derived from this idea. Forget the amazing shows that have a cult audience with incredible writing. We're gonna cancel them out of nowhere and instead replace it with 10 more shows, 9 of which are overtly terrible, and the last one is just okay, and then we'll cancel all of those too before they get to actually finish. It's a common practice for art to be compromised by commercialization. Bit by bit, these streaming services that were supposedly above cable have started sacrificing parts of their essential business model to earn more money. A very real and literal depiction of the consequences of capitalism. Namely, with putting ads in the middle of streamable content that isn't made to have ad breaks. It interrupts the flow of the episode in a major way, and the entire appeal of these services was the ability to watch unencumbered by ads. I have fully stopped using Amazon Prime. Fuck you, Amazon, for putting ads in your service, because now I am forced to rewatch Fleabag illegally, and I watched the new season of The Boys illegally as well. Go fuck yourself. No ads. I mean, today, the big 5 studios in Hollywood have a pretty aggressive chokehold on the industry, and while there are far more studios than these 5, of course, many of them are just divisions of these larger 5 companies, which are, by the way, Universal, Paramount, Warner Brothers, Disney, and Sony. Paramount and Warner Brothers of which have been around since the golden age of film. They have owned a significant piece of the media industry and have only upgraded their influence over time. They are conglomerates at the end of the day, and they collect 80 to 85% of box office revenue, creating an oligopoly in the market, where new studios struggle to find footing without being bought out by one of these 5. It is nearly impossible for any film to succeed on an international level without being distributed by one of these 5 companies. Just 5. And they address this pretty directly in Bojack when PC struggles to start up her own agency. Eventually, she states that while they're struggling, they're just going to get bought out by one of the big 5 agencies and that there's no point to anything they might try.
Soon I'll get some offer from one of the big 5 agencies that I can't say no to, and I'll go back to being another cog in the giant Play-Doh spaghetti maker that is this industry.
And she literally won't be able to say no to it. And here I thought the market was supposed to be free. But one thing that's also clear in Bojack is how this industry profits off of personas and the celebrity culture. I mean, think about how many people tune into the Oscars, this entire season-long event that millions of people obsess over, just to worship and fawn over these people that simply do their jobs, just in a more public space. In an article I've linked below, we can see celebrity culture produce produce giant monetary output in 3 major ways. First, with news outlets that provide information about the celebrities themselves, since we're interested in their lives. Second, with the large amount of merchandise created depicting the celebrity, a character they portray, or a special phrase they've said, creates a huge market for commodities like mugs, t-shirts, water bottles, etc. And third, using celebrities themselves to endorse products that already exist, contributing to higher sales in general. And it leads to the names and personas of these celebrities to become common goods in these industries. They strip away the humanity and the fact that these are real people with emotions and opinions, instead using them for their own benefit and condemning them when necessary. Think about how much money is made in the tabloid area simply from straight up stalking celebrities for photos or fueling rumors about their private life and drama that may or may not have occurred. There is nothing these figures can do to stop these tabloids either, as it is completely legal for them to practice this, leading to celebrities literally not having any ownership or control over their own name and public image, which is a right I feel like everyone deserves to have. And the effect of these people being used as product is clear as day in Bojack's case. It makes them feel as if they have no worth besides what they do in the public eye, as Bojack searches across the seasons to find a project that will fulfill him and prove to himself that he is in fact worth something. A lot of this is attached to his upbringing and the neglect that he felt from his own parents, but Hollywood instinctually uses that need for attention and profits off of it. Almost like how capitalism by itself convinces us our only value is through our job or career by fundamentally not taking care of those who cannot work or accommodating those with special needs, subconsciously telling them that they do not matter because they can't make these big corporations money. After all, they're the ones that create the laws anyway. Think also about the struggle that Todd goes through with Jorge in season 6 as well. While Todd is happy with how his life is going, Jorge insists that it's not enough because he doesn't have a, quote, real job.
I wanted so much for you, Todd. I wanted to push you to be your best self. I see now that I failed you.
But you didn't fail me, because I am not a failure. Why do you need to be proud of me on your terms? Why can't you see I'm living a good life? I have friends, I have a job.
You sleep on the couch and you play with puppets all day.
I'm happy, Jorge. What more do you want from me?
But if Todd is happy and has a safe place to live, what does it matter? As a parent, isn't really that all you want for your children? Just also listen to how Princess Carolyn speaks about actors and the issues that they are going through now and then. If she's not close to them, they're almost like game pieces to her. Objects, just an exploitable means for profit at the end of the day. I love PC, but it is undeniable that she could not care less about her clients. Their identity and how they're viewed in the public eye directly contributes to their paycheck at the end of the day, so she approaches it from a business standpoint rather than a human one. She ends up forgiving and working with people like Vance Wagner, who is objectively horrible to everyone around him and is also super dangerous for young women coming up in the industry. But he can make people money, and might be the best for this show. So, let's cast him. Luckily, this show has very nuanced character writing. So, later in the series, Princess Carolyn is able to break out of this cycle of capitalistic greed and realize that she is perpetuating the awful treatment of the workers at a lower tier, just as was done to her. And then, when those same people do unimaginable things, that same industry is willing to dump them without a second thought to be able to appeal to the general public. And they don't think twice about doing so either, because these aren't actual people in their eyes. They're products that can be promoted or thrown in the back room whenever necessary. And then this practice also leads to the abuse of children in an effort to appeal to a wider audience for higher revenue, exposing them to some really brutal themes when they are far too young to understand and process such concepts correctly. You should all watch this short called He Touched Me, directed by Jeanette McCurdy. Yes, I'm bringing her up again in relation to this argument, because it details this problem in a really effective and concise way. How these children are used to tell stories that most parents wouldn't let their own children anywhere near, and how some parents take advantage of their child's need for attention and praise to be able to make a quick buck. This industry using these children to convey themes that they, behind closed doors, actually promote in the long run. In order to convey these stories in the most effective way possible, the entertainment industry has basically just subverted child labor laws. While regulated, children working in the entertainment industry are exempt from national labor laws. Instead, they take their laws from the state. All of which Sarah Lynn does directly bring up as an issue in the show.
You know, it's amazing that it's legal for kids to be actors. How is that not child labor? I didn't know what I was signing up for. I was 3.
How have we circumvented it this way? I think there are really acceptable ways to do this if a child truly wants to act, like Bluey, which is a children's cartoon that doesn't list the names of the child actors to protect their identity from being commercialized as they so often are. Acting can be a fun pastime for children, and if they truly want to audition and participate in the show, that's great, but we shouldn't be using them for profit or using their identity to sell merchandise. Because oftentimes, when a child is sold in that cute, lovable kid persona, they're cast away when they grow up and lose that adorable factor as Hollywood sees it. We see this blatantly through Sarah Lynn's journey on the show, where Sarah Lynn actually wanted to be an architect, but her mother forced her through a child acting career, and when she couldn't rely on her cuteness anymore, she relied on her good looks and sex appeal. And eventually, when even that ran out in Hollywood's eyes, she was completely thrown away, ruining her self-esteem and bringing her substance abuse issues that also stemmed from her exposure to this industry to the surface. Like all celebrities, her only value to Hollywood was what money she could make them. So when no one could exploit her image anymore, they just decided to leave her behind. And it ultimately led to her overdose, which the media really pretended to care about all of a sudden and then proceeded to monetize her death. Facts we learn about this publicity after her death.
Some have accused Sarah Lynn's mother of exploiting her death. When you hear all twerk and no play in a Geico commercial, or see Sarah Lynn's face on a billboard with the slogan, "I die for a Pepsi,"
is such a dark fact. She is still being used and commercialized by her mother and this industry even after she's passed, because once again, she's in the public eye as a national tragedy. And sadly, it's not an uncommon story in Hollywood in real life. This is a pattern that continues to repeat itself. Gladly, I think there are many examples of child actors today being able to move past what's happened to them, like Macaulay Culkin or Lindsay Lohan, as more of this awful behavior from Hollywood is exposed and discussed so publicly. But not to mention that, in the past, you have Joseph Sugarman and other fathers essentially offering up their children as part of a business deal.
Father, do you aim to marry me off to Corbin Creamerman merely because it would be good for business?
Well, I suppose I do have a few ideas of how a Sugarman-Creamerman alliance might be advantageous.
Simply be marrying them off to improve their own selfish financial interests. It's not just a problem with Hollywood, but Hollywood has a scale of visibility that allows more people access to the stories, so that is what we see most often. This happens all throughout America. And while yes, we have moved forward, there's still a ways to go. Another thing that this show goes at length to show us is the dangers of the oligopoly and megacorporations. Philip Morris, Disney, Fox, AT&T, AOL, Time Warner, PepsiCo, Halliburton, Skynet, Toyota, Trader Joe's, and eventually just White Whale, buying out smaller businesses, entertainment and news media outlets, and generally owning everything is a terrifying yet realistic portrayal of modern capitalism in America.
Did you hear about Philip Morris, Disney, Fox, AT&T, AOL, Time Warner, PepsiCo, Halliburton, Skynet, Toyota, Trader Joe's?
What about them?
They got acquired by White Whale.
Oh, shit. Well, how many companies are there now? 4?
Where small, independent startups can't make it a couple years without being bought out by huge corporations or conglomerates. And how when all these companies continue to combine, we move closer and closer to reaching a single oligopoly. In fact, America has reached oligopoly status already in a bunch of individual industries, including music and film, technology, airlines, cell phone carriers, and many, many more. There are such significant barriers to entry in these markets that startups have practically no chance, leaving less and less room for independent business in America as a whole. And this consolidation continues day by day with our industries in the United States. In general, American industries have become more concentrated in the last 40 years, according to an article I've cited below. Using data from the past 100 years, they found that asset shares of the top 1% have increased 27 percentage points since the 1930s, and for the top 0.1%, 40 percentage points, showing that the top businesses have been accruing more and more of the general sales and the market share over the decades, as the barriers to entry for smaller firms slowly become higher and higher, leading to most smaller corporations being bought out by the top earners, cementing this cycle even further. And many economists over the years have cited that concentration of industries and production is one of the key aspects and results of capitalism. Marx predicted that because of inherent rampant competition, most capitalists would end up bankrupt, leaving only a top few to control all production, further widening that divide between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. And not only this, but that the greed and the competition of capitalism would eventually reach a climax, so much so that the system destroys itself, which, with how the environment is going right now, might be currently happening. It's why we don't have an entirely free market in America today, and why we shouldn't. Without any sort of system of checks and balances, we will eventually move further and further toward a true monopoly, to the detriment of the rights of workers and consumers everywhere, as this leads to higher prices and lower wages due to decreased competition. Yeah, sure, I would like to believe that this wouldn't happen, but that would also require me to believe that companies are inherently virtuous, and are only conducting business because they think it'd be good for the general populace. Which is obviously not the case. I wouldn't expect that to be the case for any business. They're always for profit. But that's exactly why these checks need to be there. And while we do have these protections, corporations still find ways to circumvent and work around the law to be able to collude and form mega companies and conglomerates like the ones we witness in the show, which in turn only end up possessing more inherent power, swaying more of the laws in their favor. But this show even goes overboard explaining the fuck out of vertical integration and how these giant corporations are able to take advantage of this so-called free market system with ease, creating an oligopoly. Ezekiel White Whale used generational wealth to buy out the means of production and distribution so he could absolutely corner the market in his favor. And by the way, him starting out with a substantial endowment from his father is incredibly indicative of how most major industries are begun in this country. And that wealth only grew to the point where White Whale is buying out nearly every company that exists in Bojack's America. Even the news outlets, to make sure that no one can criticize him and to be able to control exactly what people focus on. The overwhelming power that capitalism provides these men is astounding and extremely worrying, as they only accrue more territory over time, and it's important to depict and highlight how they can act without any regard for morals or laws, since they own media outlets who will never publicize their mistakes, even if they're as overtly terrible as straight-up murder. Side note, if I were Diane in this conversation with Jeremiah White Whale, I might have taken a shot at Jeremiah and pushed him out of the building. It's so tempting with that feeble walk and his giant fat head. Ugh, I hate this man and every real-life person that he represents. Oh, and don't think that this is an exactly fictional concept. Apple literally did the exact same thing in real life and is actually dangerously close to monopoly status in the smartphone market, blocking cross-platform technology and generally blocking apps that could compete with their own in their own app store, trying to corner off the market for themselves entirely. The DOJ is actually currently suing Apple for violating antitrust laws. It is that real of an issue, guys. But in the show, we can see this with things like the Every Animal Girl doll company, where instead of White Whale accepting any competition with their already existing toy company, Toys Galore, they instead decided to just buy out the Every Animal doll company and force them in a more environmentally harmful direction, even if that wasn't part of the original concept. And I'm sure eventually, in an effort to cheapen production or appeal to a wider audience, I can imagine lots of men calling these dolls woke, White Whale will scrap the entire initial concept of the company. And if these two, who created it, try to fight it, they are out of there, because guess what? They don't technically own this company anymore. But I also don't see that happening, as the capitalistic greed has already corrupted these two after joining White Whale, where it might seem like they started with good intentions and as two best friends who truly wanted to make a difference, they are now closing factories and relocating overseas right before the holidays. Literally the most cold and callous decisions, simply for profit. That is the White Whale way. This also speaks to a larger issue of corrupting those who engage heavily with the corporate capitalist lifestyle, slowly sacrificing parts of themselves to stay afloat, all while telling themselves that they are still the hero that they began as, until they become the very thing that they were against when they started in the business. Gotta consolidate those production costs, folks. We need them as low as possible. Who cares if the workers are literally abused, and also not even in the country? As I mentioned earlier, we do see this with Princess Carolyn, even if she does break out of it, how it's so easy to lose your perspective and to forget your own roots after attaining certain levels of success within the capitalist market. It forces you to be so competitive, so cutthroat, to sacrifice so much of yourself that it turns you into something you never thought you'd be, albeit slow enough that you'll never notice. And in America's case, the patriarchy has kind of commandeered capitalism and twisted it in their own favor to be able to pit women against each other and create this perception that other women are the enemy when they really should be working together, supporting one another and lifting each other up to both be able to reach positions of power in this industry that is dominated by men. We see this most evidently with Princess Carolyn and Vanessa Gecko, two women who could have been friends for the entire series, but because of their position and being forced to be so cutthroat in an industry where it is generally easier for men to ascend, they end up as adversaries on the opposite sides of conflicts generally. And even though Vanessa says she didn't see Princess Carolyn as an enemy, I do believe they were still adversaries. At least from Princess Carolyn's side, she still viewed her as the enemy, or a villain, when really, they are both just women trying to make it in this industry. Or how people like Mr. Peanut Butter, who are relatively pure, even with their faults, can be manipulated and taken advantage of, ignorantly becoming part of an incredibly nefarious and destructive capitalist scheme without really knowing the details of how it works. The issue is also prevalent in Hank After Dark, with Vanity Fair not being willing to print a credible story because they're owned by a company that also supports a network profiting off of the celebrity that would be ruined by this article.
I had a conversation with my bosses at AOL, Time Warner, PepsiCo, Viacom, Halliburton, Skynet, Toyota, Trader Joe's, and we agreed these kind of stories, they don't sell magazines.
So this has nothing to do with the fact that AOL, Time Warner, PepsiCo, Viacom, Halliburton, Skynet, Toyota, Trader Joe's also owns MBN and is currently profiting off of Hank Hippopopoulos' good reputation?
Once again, the woman who runs Vanity Fair actually cares about this issue, but is manipulated into complacency via a threat to her position. Plus, she gets forced to serve shitty Oreos because Trader Joe's technically owns their ass too. A great joke, but also a really subtle way to show how corporations can affect daily life right down to the food we are served. And when Diane and Guy begin to work for White Whale through Girl Crush, the censorship begins immediately, with them not being able to say negative things about any subsidiary or sister company, as they put it, of White Whale. Meanwhile, that book of sister companies, oh my god, it's enormous. It's impossible to say anything of value anymore, when the entire purpose of this show in the first place was to expose the rotten underbelly of American capitalism. Again, not my words. This is also one of my favorite aspects of the capitalistic megacorporation, pretending not to own everything. I'll get more into this later, but utilizing different names and goofy branding techniques to divert from the fact that every single media company providing news in this reality is just White Whale. The entire purpose of this series that they created was completely taken apart by the fact that they are quite literally forbidden from talking about every single problematic industry they intended to comment on. And then it leads to the heads of these corporations being given license to mistreat their workers with impunity, like with Jedediah White Whale straight up murdering his own employees for wanting to take more bathroom breaks. Oh my god! Sounds strangely familiar to a certain "we had to pee in bottles" story emerging a few years back about a specific company. I guess it's less ludicrous than we think it is at first. Billionaires allowed to murder might seem like the most ridiculous idea ever, as an example, but honestly, it's already happening in real life.
Good morning. Sunday morning.
Just much, much less blatantly, of course. I love Diane's protest in this moment too as a depiction of what a chokehold these businesses have over our democratic system, where even with these checks and balances, there's almost no chance they'll ever actually be able to challenge the ruling, primarily because most of the government is also owned by these very corporations.
Hold on. Just because it passed the House doesn't mean the Senate
Really, Diane?
Okay, but the president could still veto.
Really, Diane?
All right, sure, but the Supreme Court... Okay, I get it.
But Jeremiah here was able to blatantly murder a worker and then leave his body on the warehouse floor as a message to the others without any interference from the law. And while yes, it does seem ridiculous for this to be overtly legal in this show, it's more a commentary on how many of these accidents likely happen in real life without any investigation or prosecution because of how many people are simply owned by this corporation. How many workers have been lost to this callous system that we don't even know about because money is able to cover it up so effectively. I don't know if you've ever heard the term rich man's justice, but it exists for a reason. And it isn't a new phrase either. It's because through money and capital, you can afford the best lawyers, pay your bail, and likely sway judges and officials through your high-powered connections, or straight up bribery. And it leads to convictions being served most often to people in lower economic classes, even if the most severe crimes are being perpetrated on the highest level by the heads of these companies or even celebrities, to be quite honest. In The Rich Get Richer and the Poor Get Prison, Jeffrey Reiman details how the American justice system favors those with wealth, and how white-collar crimes, even when convicted at a significantly lower number than other crimes, even though they cost the American people the most amount of money, are treated with less severity than others. How we imprison more and more people each year with little to no success in actually reducing crime overall, because we don't address the crimes that are the root causes of these issues. To me, this is a consequence tied to the capitalistic view I explored earlier of a human being's worth relating directly to the monetary value they can provide to this country. Another aspect is the moral and environmental impacts of privatization and capitalistic ideologies. This show depicts time and time again how the material interests of politicians and businesses can take advantage and slowly destroy the world around us, and how capitalism drives us as a country further and further to ultimate ruin. ruin. Capitalism by its nature always seeks to expand and grow, innovate and develop, and to accrue more capital than ever previously had, while the Earth's resources are finite. According to economist Paul M. Sweezy, a system driven by capital accumulation is one that never stands still. As far as the natural environment is concerned, capitalism perceives it not as something to be cherished and enjoyed, but as a means to the paramount ends of profit-making, and still more, capital accumulation. Capitalism as a system is largely unplanned and anarchic, leading to an extreme amount of unintended consequences and ramifications, which economists in favor of the system label as externalities. That is to say, side effects of a system that generally works. But when you consider that you need the environment to be able to produce, or that your workers need to be healthy and happy to succeed, you see that capitalistic greed kind of works around to eat its own tail. Which might be what Alex was talking about, no, not me, in Yesterdayland.
So, these two were so consumed by greed that it destroyed them. You know, I came here today to blow up Disneyland.
You what?
But now I realize I don't need to take down capitalism. Capitalism sows the seeds for its own destruction. It's a snake that eats itself. It's only a matter of time.
This tie between value and capital works against our own interests, and while it may lead to higher economic output per person, the general satisfaction of life continually decreases, or remains stagnantly low. For more information on this topic, read What Every Environmentalist Needs to Know About Capitalism. It's where many of these points are sourced from, and it does a fantastic job outlining the detriment of capitalism on our own world and quality of life. In Bojack, however, this is mainly depicted in Season 4, surrounding the fracking issue, where it is very clearly detailed to us how harmful this practice is for the environment and the very overt ecological implications of drilling without any regard for the land you're drilling in. Mr. Peanut Butter's house straight up falls into an abyss as a result of these actions, and while a silly depiction of these consequences, it is an accurate representation of the structural damages fracking can cause, not to mention the damages to natural habitats and the pollution of air and water through this practice. But despite all of this, there are still people lobbying in favor of fracking, trying to expand drilling efforts across the US because of the monetary value of extracting more oil and natural gas, even if it affects real people on a daily basis and their ability to attain clean drinking water. And this isn't the only issue that this election brings up, which I'll get even further into later, where Katrina pretty explicitly states that her goal is to build private prisons on protected wetlands.
It's about hope and freedom and powerful lobbyists who pay me to elect a governor I can control so we can get legislation passed that allows them to build private prisons on what are now protected wetlands.
Even though wetlands have been proven time and time again to be crucial to the environment by filtering water, controlling flooding, and providing a home to thousands of different species of plants and animals, there are still companies, apparently in this universe private prisons, lobbying to take advantage of these resources despite the overt benefits they have on society as a whole. Because money. Or how in Thoughts and Prayers, the main issue is how to continue to sell products around tragedy rather than actually addressing and focusing on the tragedy itself.
I am sick and tired of real-life gun violence getting in the way of us telling stories that glamorize gun violence.
This type of behavior and these major tragedies are also commodified and sold as badass renegade media, as this scene with Lenny Turtletop shows us. There's so much media out there depicting national tragedies, and while yes, they are forms of art, they're still pieces of product to those that produce them, just something that will make them money. And in turn, those tragedies then eventually become events that could make them money.
In a world of increasing terror, our movie tells women they don't have to be afraid anymore.
When you put it that way, it almost sounds like all these mass shootings could be a good thing for the movie.
No, of course not. They're terrible tragedy, and my thoughts and prayers are with the victims.
Right, thoughts and prayers.
But anything that makes women feel unsafe might actually help our box office.
But you don't want women to feel unsafe.
Nobody wants that. Nobody's saying that.
But if they already do feel unsafe, there's no reason not to capitalize on that. We're not making them feel unsafe, we're just profiting, albeit indirectly, from there being more mass shootings.
Well, in that case, I got good news and I got bad news. Bad news is you're going to want to avoid the 405.
Where PC, in this very episode, turns to commercializing the tragedy in their own interests. But when the tragedy mirrors their film too closely to the point where it can't be released without being called disrespectful, it is getting in the way. There's no actual care for any of the victims or the root causes of these incidents, only how much money they might lose as a result, even though they're partially responsible for spreading this violent imagery. Even during Hurricane Sandy, they had a film they couldn't release and are still actively mourning due to the money they lost, even though there were people who lost their entire lives during that disaster. But to them, the most important part was their Sandra Bullock clumsy babysitter movie wasn't able to be released. This idea can also be seen in Chickens, where the desire to make money circumvents basic morality in a major way, to the point where this universe condones cannibalism by law. Chickens farm other chickens who are made out to be a different species, even though they're born in the exact same manner as friend chickens. And these chickens themselves have been swayed by profit and their class difference from these other chickens to the point where they're able to essentially torture and kill their own kind without really thinking twice about it. They are straight up genetically modifying these chickens so that they are, quote, not friends or not human in our terms. And we can see the emotional effect that this can have on those who realize the gravity of this practice, like the mother at Gentle Farms, who had no stomach for this type of life. I honestly have always felt sorry for this woman, but her husband has become so enthralled by their success and how much capital they've made that he is almost serial killer-like this episode, hunting the chickens as if they're mere prey and not people who are the exact same species as him. And this episode straight up says that factory farming and what Chicken for Days does in general is basically out of a horrifying dystopian nightmare where we are evil monsters due to our treatment of these animals, and that is a direct commentary on real life. Listen, I still eat chicken, but every time I come back to this episode, I take a week-long break because it feels a little weird. It's hard to avoid this fact that through our capitalistic practices, the production of meat has been cut down to the cheapest and thereby cruelest form. And while yes, people who eat chicken don't deserve blame for that, it's not their fault the industry has turned that way, there is something to be said about capitalism driving these types of industries to cut production costs as much as possible to the point where we are actually horrifying evil monsters. Not to mention that all these real issues are distracted from utilizing those high-profile identities and pieces of art they've already commodified. Celebrity culture and the infatuation with Hollywood in the news outlets is one of the oldest and most common ways to distract and placate the public when more serious transgressions are happening right below the surface. Or sometimes they'll even promote media that comments the opposite of what they promote in private. Like how The Boys is a show that's all about the dangers of giant corporations, but then it's, you know, produced by Amazon. So, just for the sake of appealing to the general demographic. Season 3 of Bojack especially goes a really long way to show us the effect of celebrity culture on society and how the entire Oscars campaign can infect every single media outlet to the point where any actual issue is completely drowned out for months on end. I mean, think about how much news space the Kardashians take up, leaving less room for actually important and exposing articles. Granted, I think the reason they're so popular is because more people pay attention to that than serious issues, but that fuels my point even further. Since these news organizations are for profit, they're going to pivot towards whatever can make them the most cash rather than what is actually socially important. And it also shows us how celebrities can be used and paid to further social causes or sway public opinion on an issue, simply because of the dangerous effect that they have over our own values. In the gubernatorial race, the current governor is trying to focus on crucially important issues to California, like relieving the current drought, which has been on and off for over a century, although in recent years has been more on than off. And even though this issue affects thousands of regular Californians, and in the future will likely affect the rest of America because nothing is being done about it, all anyone will talk about is the ski race down Devil's Mountain that the governor has been challenged to by some random celebrity who has zero qualifications for the job. Where have I seen that before? And all the news outlets, of course, come out in full force to publicize this, rather than focusing on the life-threatening issue that only becomes more and more problematic. Why is this the case? Because the people who own them are trying to protect their own interests and distract from the fact that they are the largest contributor to these ecological issues due to their addiction for the cheapest possible production and the quickest turn in revenue. And then they're able to utilize connections with other politicians who also have no souls, creating a straight-up ridiculous law based on the media force they had backing them, and using the title of the law itself and the ski race to further distract from the fact that this law will cost California practically its entire budget, ruin the state's economy, build a useless fucking highway through the ocean, contributing to some more greenhouse gas production, by the way, and get more and more babies addicted to vaping. Capitalism, you've done it again. Not to mention that the entire election becomes dependent on a ski race rather than where anyone stands on social or economic issues, aka the things we should actually be considering during election instead of petty drama from the tabloids and talk shows. These companies don't want people discussing those issues publicly, because either one, they'll have to get involved and make a statement, which, no matter what side they take, will decrease their overall customer base. Or, two, the causes of those issues stems from the company itself. So instead, every effort is exhausted to deflect from these issues so that they continue these destructive practices in secret while purporting these very socially conscious values on the surface. We also see this idea with the full responsibility poppers when Chicken for Days has made such an obvious and public error.
I want to take full responsibility for this mishap. That's why, for a limited time, everybody, we are offering our special full responsibility poppers at participating restaurants for only $4.99.
To deflect from how overtly awful their business practices are, they instead provide consumers with a pathetic discount that still ensures them a handsome profit due to the cheap production costs to lure more people toward their product. Honestly, the whole idea is to take accountability in the moment, but get the public back to forgetting about how they treat the chickens with sales and delicious nuggets, eventually returning to the same status quo that they began in, or, as Chicken shows us, increasing their sales in the process, with the 5 billion customers becoming 6 right before our eyes due to their increased marketing campaign. Also, like I mentioned before with the Every Animal Girl company, they will tout their social prowess as much as they can to distract and dodge the fact that they're hurting the environment or being objectively terrible in the effort to make their product.
Is it true that all your dolls are made out of recycled material?
Yes.
Sorry?
Well, yeah, traditionally, the first batch, recycling doesn't scale. We're two best friends.
What a happy story for two best friends. Now, about the recycled materials?
Well, it's unclear what role recycling will play in the future of this company. Right now, we're mainly focused on empowering young girls.
The deflection in the Every Animal Girl interview with Diane is a pretty direct example of this, as they simply try to paper over all the negative press with the one thing they're doing correctly. That is, empowering young women and promoting realistic body standards in these dolls, which you can't deny is important, but they were doing something equally important to the environment that they conceded once they were bought by a larger corporation. Virtue signaling is the name of the game with corporations. Hey, we treat our workers like garbage, but we made our logo a rainbow for Pride Month. Isn't that cool, gays? Buy our stuff. I think a lot of people see right through this practice, rightfully, but it's still common to tout socially conscious values without practicing them in any way on a real level. This isn't a new practice either. Even without the advent of social media, heads of corporations frequently give millions to charities to flaunt their philanthropic values, despite the fact that their workers are being actively mispaid or mistreated in the process of producing those millions for them. Again, it's an act that they can do easily, that is objectively good. Where, yes, we don't deny that we want them to give millions to these charities, but doing so for them is really only a way to earn good press, rather than actually change the world for the better. And then retaining branding and the appearance of corporate diversity is what allows them this cover of not being a mega corporation. When Girl Crush is bought, it's bought by White Whale, but they hide it through the selling of Fuddruckers, and then merging it with Dow Chemical, of all things, to create a media conglomerate called Spronk. It's so bizarre, you really can't even tell where Spronk began, which is definitely the entire idea. Again, this goofy and entirely unrelated branding with relation to the two businesses combined to create it are all an effort to distract from the fact that White Whale now owns a larger piece of America, and corporate diversity has once again taken a huge hit. They could put the White Whale brand on everything that they own. But they know that if they do that, they draw criticism from the public and possible heat from the Department of Justice. Instead, rebranding and keeping the appearance of the companies separate helps them maintain this free market illusion that's being created in America today. The show also makes an effort to show how capitalism has resulted in the prominent figures in our elections often being bought and owned by lobbyists hired by powerful corporations to protect their own selfish interests. And what the politicians are actually in favor of might simply be dictated by a company, as evidenced by Mr. Peanut Butter's run for governor in season 4 of this very show. Katrina, his ex-wife, is essentially a puppet master for Mr. Peanut Butter, telling him exactly what he believes and using his naivete and need to be liked and accepted to drive him toward her own selfish interests. And she herself is a puppet for these corporate interests that seek to earn profit from every corner of the explored world possible, even if every scientist is begging them to stop. In the beginning of the campaign, when they're trying to recall Woodchuck Coodchuck Berkowitz, they themselves state that they have no reason for doing so except for the fact that Katrina is currently being paid by powerful lobbyists. They don't stand for anything. Mr. Peanut Butter is stupid enough to go along with this half-baked plan even though he doesn't care at all about being governor, and they have no valid reason for wanting the current governor gone. Who, by the way, is actually shown to be, despite not a great speaker or presenter, an important politician and voice of reason for the state of California. It speaks to how corporations are placing these idiotic puppets as our politicians and replacing those who actually have impassioned stances and will protect the interests of the people they govern. And Mr. Peanut Butter is a great example of this easily manipulated, lovable goof who is the perfect prey for these giant corporations to stamp their beliefs on. Or, at least, the beliefs that will make them more money. They don't really have beliefs. The only thing that really matters to connect with voters is to seem like you care about them and their interests. And then whatever you do in your career is entirely up to you. As Mr. Peanut Butter says,
nothing anyone says during a campaign matters. It's just promising a bunch of stuff to get people to vote for you. Then, when you get in office, you can do whatever you want.
Democracy in action.
A politician's entire job is speaking, essentially. More so than lawmaking or protecting democracy or whatever the fuck they pretend to care about. Their career is entirely dependent on whether or not they get reelected. Whether or not during their campaign, they're able to connect with voters. And to do so, you have to pretend to care about a lot of things. Or put aside things that you do care about to avoid angering people or protect your voter base. But at the end of the day, the only thing they're actually going to do when they're in office is what the lobbyists and the corporations pay them to do. Because once again, many of them don't actually care or stand for anything. Not all, but many. And their entire re-election is dependent on whether these super PACs or corporations will still align themselves with the politician after their term is over. That is, how many of our interests did you protect or further? Could we get more use out of somebody else? And this reliance on campaign contributions from corporations and the ability to circumvent campaign donation laws for the sake of unlimited access has led to our elections to be heavily influenced by megacorporations and billionaires. We need to have harder caps on campaign contributions. It is such a fundamental problem with our elections. Success in an election is largely representative by how much money you're running with, and since large corporations and the families tied to them hold a majority of the wealth, they get to control what issues are spoken about and how far in either direction, left or right, both parties will go, since they are the ones paying to get these politicians in office. According to the Center for Responsive Politics, in 2000, 94% of House candidates who spent more money than their opponents were victorious in their race, and this is regardless of political party. And since then, the amount spent on lobbying in the United States has only increased from a meager $1.56 billion in 2000 to over $4.25 billion in 2023. This phenomenon is only growing further and further, and as less and less people control the majority of the wealth in this country, the more narrow-minded and less diverse the debates and discussions in our elections become, and is a large reason why it seems to focus on stupid bullshit, like Bojack comments on in this season. Jessica Biel herself, when running in Mr. Peanut Butter's place, straight up states that the only thing voters actually care about is stupid bullshit.
I just wanted to tell you, you can keep writing whatever you want about me. Obviously, it has no effect on the polls, because the only thing voters care about is stupid bullshit, so knock yourself out.
And that the only thing propelling them forward are the corporations that allow them to run. It's pretty blatant. And Diane defeats her by using this concept against her and getting the public to hate her for disliking avocados. But overall, Bojack has a ton to say about the dangers of capitalism and the road that we are treading down, how it can affect our environment, our elections, and even our daily lives. And most importantly, how there needs to be more change and more awareness raised to this unchecked power to make sure that these awful people at the heads of these top industries don't encroach further on our freedom as Americans, and answer for their own choices and mistakes. I think media like Bojack is crucially important for Americans to consume, to be able to further recognize, speak on, and ultimately act on these issues by getting involved in their local politics and raising their voice as often as they can. Thank you to the writers for all of these gigantically pivotal and visible discussions on these extremely crucial crucial issues to our country, and at least for bringing them to the forefront for the millions of people that watch this show. But if you agree, tell us why in the comments below, or even if you didn't agree, feel free to join the discussion. We'd love to hear your opinions on these matters, and I would love to hear more about what you think Bojack says about the effect of capitalism and the current state of America. But if you want to see more content like this, consider subscribing and joining us on Patreon at patreon.com/PosiTVty. That's PosiTVty. There you get all these videos early, you get the unedited essays, and you could choose whatever you want to see on the channel, so it's a great way to get more content for yourself, but also support us in the process. But thank you for watching anyway. We appreciate each and every bit of support we get from those of you on YouTube as well, and we hope you will join us for the next one. Goodbye.